Today we're seeing how far we can stretch 80 bucks for one person. I got all my ingredients from Walmart and left some money left over to buy a few things as we run out. I got one package of the original Great Value sausage, one package of festive ground turkey, a package of drumsticks, which was $4.49, one 18 count of eggs, a bag of shredded mozzarella, which was a pound. I did try to get the block, which was a little bit cheaper, but they didn't have that in stock. Also, I got a half gallon of milk and a thing of Imperial margarine. The half gallon of milk, I was hoping to get whole milk, but all they had was 1%, so that's what I got. I counted out these oranges. We have 20 oranges, mandarins, a package of 2 pounds of carrots, a frozen bag of mixed vegetables, a frozen bag of broccoli cuts, as well as a bag of onions. I also got a green pepper. I got a big bag of potatoes, 5 pounds to be exact. Also 1 can of tomato paste and one of the pineapple tidbits. I have a 5-pound bag worth of flour. I usually buy mine in much bigger bags, so I just kind of measured out the 5 pounds. I got a box of rotini, a bag of brown rice, and then I also wanted this whole grocery haul to include a giant restock. So we've got a lot of condiments. We've got some ketchup, some salt, some vanilla, some vinegar, oil, sugar. I have a box of 20 count of our vanilla chai tea bags, which I felt like would be a really good, nice thing in the morning. I also got several spices. I got ground cinnamon, Italian seasoning, garlic powder, some yeast, some bouillon cube, and baking soda, and that's what we're gonna have for our restock for this haul. I do get a lot of comments asking what if we don't have oil on hand, what if we don't have salt and pepper and basics. So I wanted to make this as if you were just moving into a place for the first time and had to start from scratch. So the first thing I'm going to prep for the week is a Bisquick mix. This is going to be kind of an all-purpose mix for pancakes, biscuits, and basically anything I would like to make that has just a little bit of several different ingredients in it. First, we're starting off with 4 cups of flour, then 2 teaspoons of baking soda, as well as a teaspoon of salt. I'm also adding 2 tablespoons of sugar. Next, we'll close the bag and just kind of mix everything together by massaging the bag. And this is going to be our base for pancakes, some biscuits, as well as some waffles. The prep portion of this video is rather long just because I tried to do as much in advance as possible so that I can have everything readily available and not take a lot of time throughout the week as I'm making up my meals. Now we're going to make some of those pancakes and waffles. These actually freeze really well and use some basic ingredients. We're using 2 cups of our all-purpose Bisquick mix, an egg that we're cracking in, 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla. This next step, I used some vinegar. I would leave out the vinegar. It tasted fine, but I felt like it made it more flat. I had heard if you use a little vinegar, it was supposed to substitute baking powder, but I haven't really found that to be the case in this recipe. So leave out the vinegar. Then a teaspoon of our oil and just kind of mix that together along with a 1/2 cup of water. Now I like my pancakes a little bit thinner, so I added another 1/4 cup of water on top of this. If you like a really thick batter and really thick pancakes, then this batter might be the thickness that you're needing. I took a teaspoon of butter and put it in my really hot pan and kind of scorched that margarine. I guess it was margarine, not butter. But I swirled it around just to try to coat the bottom side and then started spooning in my batter. I like to make a little smiley face as like a test pancake, and that kind of gets it darker. It helps me to see if the pan's hot, as well as makes a fun design on the outside of the pancake. This is something my dad taught me as I was growing up. He would make pancakes and put smiley faces on them. So then you just spoon the batter right on top of it once it's kind of gotten a little bit dark, and when you flip it over, it'll have a little smiley face. This first one, of course, doesn't turn out quite as well as the other ones, but I think I included a little bit of a clip of one of the later pancakes, so you'll get to see that one as well. As I'm making these, I set these over on a plate and just let them cool all the way off because I plan on storing these for breakfast throughout the week. I like to prep breakfast ahead of time because a lot of times in the morning I'm busy and I just don't have a lot of time to make a breakfast, so having something that's just microwavable or I can pop in a toaster oven is perfect for me. I also got my little mini dash. You don't have to do waffles with this, but you could do all the way pancakes if you felt like it. But yeah, I did have a little dash mini waffle maker that I could use, so I went ahead and made use of that in this video and made a few of these waffles. I think I ended up making 2 of these little mini waffles for one of our breakfasts, and you can see it makes a nice little pattern, little shape. It's cute. It goes in the toaster oven when you're reheating it, which is really perfect. Here are our finished pancakes. I did set them out on a cookie sheet then and let them cool off completely, and then use a little parchment paper and just kind of put one piece of parchment paper in between them and then stuck them in the freezer. I took 2 of the pancakes and set those aside for a breakfast sandwich that we're going to be making for later this week as well. But this bag I went ahead and stuck in the freezer. Now we're going to go ahead and get started on some biscuits. We're using our Bisquick mix that we made up just a minute ago. We're putting 2 cups of that Bisquick mix and 1 of our sticks of margarine into this bowl. Then we're just going to try to break it all the way up. I used a whisk this time. You can use a knife or a pastry cutter if you have one of those, or one of those other things that cuts the butter in. I think it is a pastry cutter. Once your margarine's incorporated, you'll add 3/4 cup of water in and then mix it until it's just combined. You don't want to over mix this, and you want to keep things as cold and cool as possible. That just helps the butter to stay intact so that it will create little pockets and make your biscuits extra flaky. I took little blobs of the biscuit dough, which doesn't sound great, but I took little bits of it and put it onto this sheet and shaped it like biscuits and set that aside. Then I took the rest of my dough and made little tiny biscuit dough balls that I stuck in the freezer then and let them harden before sticking them into a plastic bag. I took my other pan that I had made those biscuits on and went ahead and baked those at 425 degrees for about 15 to 20 minutes until they had browned a little bit, and then I sliced them in half and let them cool off. Now I'm kind of making all of our breakfast sandwiches at once. I'll have my next video is going to show what I had for breakfast, lunch, and dinner for the next 6 days, and this one's just covering our prep day, the one day that I had of these meals. So I'm just making these ahead of time because I like to have breakfast made in advance, like I said. So here's our breakfast egg that we're going to put on our sandwich. Now you can, of course, take these and keep them separate, or really scramble up the eggs, or do whatever you like. I like to make different kinds of sandwiches to carry with me to work just because it's easier that way to have something portable to eat on the way to work. I chose to do the next one as like a country scrambled egg, where you just crack the egg in the pan and then scramble it, and add about a tablespoon worth of that mozzarella cheese on top just to make it a little cheesy. For my next breakfast sandwich, I took about a tablespoon of our breakfast sausage, flattened it into a patty, and then just cooked the sausage patty up. Added that onto my biscuit. Next, I fried another egg and stuck that on top of that. Then added about a tablespoon of that mozzarella cheese, or maybe not even quite a tablespoon of the mozzarella cheese on top to make a sausage, egg, and cheese biscuit. I then made some homemade syrup for our pancakes and waffles. I took a 1/2 cup of water, a 1/2 cup of sugar, and 1 teaspoon of our vanilla extract, and added that into a skillet, and then just brought it to a little bit of a simmer for about 5 minutes, and then turned it off and let it cool down. If it does end up crystallizing at all, you can add a little more water and microwave it to reheat it and keep that sugar from crystallizing. Here's our pancake sandwich I made with 2 of our pancakes, an over easy egg, and another one of those sausage patties that I made with a tablespoon of the sausage. Next, I started on some homemade gravy. I browned up a tablespoon of our sausage, added a teaspoon of flour into that pan, and just swirled it around so that it absorbed all the grease. Then added in a half a cup of our milk. Then I also added a pinch of garlic powder and a little bit of salt just to taste. Now you could add pepper in it if you had pepper. I kind of forgot that I would need pepper for this particular dish, so I hadn't added it into this part of the grocery haul. I left a little bit of room in the budget to go back and get anything that I had forgotten or that I might need, and so I do plan on getting pepper at some point. So our next batch of our sausage gravy that we're making up that will go with pasta and other things, be able to use our pepper with. I also wanted to make a vanilla creamer to go with that vanilla chai tea that I had gotten. So I took 2 cups of milk, added it to a saucepan along with 1 cup of sugar, as well as a tablespoon of my vanilla extract. I let all this come to a simmer, stirring it occasionally just to make sure nothing clumped along the sides, and let it heat all the way through. I then stuck the creamer in a small container in the fridge. I then decided to take the rest of my sausage and go ahead and brown it up and drain it and set it aside in a bag in my freezer, because frozen sausage goes really well and can be added to meals throughout the week without me having to worry about getting a pan greasy or adding anything extra to the timeline of making the meal. I did go ahead and reserve about 2 tablespoons worth of the cooked sausage in that pan, and went ahead and added 2 tablespoons of flour as well. Then added a cup of the milk and let that mix in slowly as I stirred to make a bigger batch of the sausage gravy that I had made earlier. I added only some salt to this one because I still hadn't bought the pepper, but I plan on adding the pepper when I reheat it for various meals throughout the week. Once the gravy had started to thicken up, I let it cool down somewhat and then added it into a Ziploc bag and sealed it tightly, and then popped that into my freezer. This type of gravy keeps really well in the freezer, and I found it makes a really easy meal during the week, or an easy breakfast during the week as well, since you can just take it out and put it in the microwave, thaw it a little bit, and then heat it up again. I do like to add a little bit more water or a little bit of milk to it when I'm reheating, just to thin it out again. And here are all the things we have prepped so far as breakfast goes. We have all 7 days of breakfast all prepped up, and we also have our syrup and our creamer, and I wanted to show you an example of how the creamer works in the tea that we're making, that chai tea. Here's our syrup. As you can see, it did crystallize a little bit, so I will have to add a little bit of water and reheat it later on. I think I did end up letting that cook a little bit too long, so I would recommend cooking it for a shorter amount of time, and that will keep it from crystallizing like that. Now, I was impressed. This comes with 20 tea bags, and they are all individually packaged, so you don't have to worry about the tea starting to grow weaker or stale because they're being exposed to the air as you open the box. But I added in my water and then put in about 4 tablespoons of creamer, which this might be a lot for some, but this was just perfect for me. I like my tea a little bit on the sweet side. Now I'm making up a batch of basic dough. All the recipes for everything are included in the description box this time around, or links to the recipes if they aren't my own. I also included any tweaks I made. This dough is very basic. It includes flour, salt, oil, yeast, and a little bit of sugar, and warm water. So I took a cup of warm water, poured it into my bowl, added in 1/4 cup of sugar, which is going to feed our yeast, and then added in the packet of yeast. The packet says it has 2 1/4 teaspoons of yeast inside of it, and that's about what we're going to need for this batch of dough. Then I gave it a little bit of a stir and waited just to make sure that the yeast had bloomed and is starting to grow. So you're going to be looking for a little bit of foam on top of the water. As long as you can see a little bit of foam and there's more foam than there was a few minutes ago, then you're good, then it's growing. It might also look a little bit like fireworks. I like to think of it as fireworks. Now I'm adding in a teaspoon of salt. I wait on adding the salt just because it can stunt the growth of your yeast if you add it too early. I added in 1/4 a cup of oil as well as 3 cups of flour, and then started to mix it. You can start off with the wooden spoon, but I definitely recommend going in with your hands after you start getting a stiffer dough, just because it's a lot easier that way, and that way you can really make sure it's well combined and start to do the kneading that is gonna be necessary in order to form the gluten and in order to form the strands that are going to create a really nice solid dough. After it was well mixed, I covered it and I stuck it in my oven, which was not turned on, just with the oven light on to keep it a little bit moist and a little bit warm in there. And then I closed the oven door and let it rise. And after it had doubled, which was about an hour later, this might differ depending on your temperatures you have outside or whether it's raining or a bunch of other things. But as long as it's about double, then you're going to take it out and go ahead and punch it down and just mix it up just one more time. Do a little bit of kneading. After you've kneaded it for a couple of minutes, I really didn't time this. This was only for a few minutes until I thought it looked well incorporated. Now to see how many fun things we can make with this one ball of dough. A while back, the notorious PIG1 asked me if I could make pizza dough again without using my bread maker, which is what I normally use to make my bread. So this time around, I will be taking a little bit and putting it aside to make a personal pan pizza as one of our meals we'll have upcoming. I started out by sectioning 2 3-inch in diameter pieces of the dough and put those pieces into our loaf pans. I have 2 small loaf pans that are going to make teeny tiny little loaves of bread, which we'll be using for some sandwiches and other things throughout the week. I also took another blue pan and put 2 roll sized pieces in about 1 inch in diameter that we're going to have as rolls. Now we're taking a 2-inch ball of dough and just stretching that out until we have a pizza shape, which I pressed into the bottom of this small pan. This is about a 6-inch pie pan or a 6-inch cake pan. You can use a flat pan as well and just stretch it out. Then I took 1-inch balls of dough and just kind of spread those out. You're going to see what we're making with these in just a little bit when I cook them up. I did 3 of these and set them onto some sheets of parchment paper onto my baking sheet. With the remaining dough, I plan on making some naan. I took small balls of dough, which were about a 1/2 inch in diameter, and rolled those out as thinly as I possibly could between 2 sheets of parchment paper. This just helped to make sure they didn't stick to anything and help the rolling out process to be a lot easier. I just used my rolling pin, rolled them out very thinly, and then I had a skillet getting hot on the stove, which I ended up flipping those onto. These puffed up really nicely. I just flipped them once it started getting a little bit brown on one side and let the other side brown. I did put the lid on while it was cooking just to help steam everything all the way through. I just find it cooks better that way. And I ended up with a beautiful plate full of naan. It ended up making about 7 naan, which was a great amount for me. If you plan on using them right away, you can keep them out. Otherwise, let them cool down all the way and then stick them in a Ziploc bag and pop them in the freezer to stay fresh until they're ready. When it comes time to heat them up, you can just take a paper towel that's damp, place them under the damp paper towel, and heat them up in the microwave for about 15 to 20 seconds. Now, here's what I was making earlier with those little flattened pieces of dough. We are making some English muffins. So I used a skillet, put a little bit of margarine in the bottom and let that heat up. Then took our raised up, I let them raise a second time, up pieces of dough that had doubled in size during that second raise. I covered them with my lid after putting them in the hot skillet. Let them steam for about 30 seconds and then flip them over once they had gotten a little bit brown on one side, and let the other side brown just as much. I then removed them and let them cool a little bit before cutting them. Now, if you cut them with a knife, you'll see there's one that has very small bubbles and the other one has actually the nooks and crannies you might be familiar with. That comes from using a fork to open it when you're making your English muffins from scratch at home. I let my bread double again in size and then stuck it in my oven at 350 degrees to start baking. You can see the loaves have already risen quite a bit, and they'll rise just a little bit more as they're baking, as well as those 2 rolls. Our pizza dough has also risen considerably. It's much more of a thick crust now, which is perfect because I like a thicker crust on pizza. If you want a thinner crust, you can always not have it raise a second time, and that will produce a thinner crust overall. I like to pre-bake my pizza crust a little bit when I'm making them in advance. This just cuts down a little bit more on time later on because all you're doing is browning the dough versus baking it and getting all those toppings to melt on top. After about 20 minutes, everything had started to brown fully, so I took all the things out of the oven and just added a little bit of margarine on top. This just adds a little bit of extra flavor. It helps soften the tops so that you don't have a really hard crust. Some people like the hard crust. I'm not as big of a fan of them, so I like to add a little bit of the margarine on top. And here is everything we were able to make with that one loaf of bread. We have all our naan, our English muffins, rolls, loaves of bread, and even a personal pan pizza. I like to pop the English muffins in the freezer. This just helps keep them fresh until I'm ready to use them. Since we already have most of our breakfast done, I didn't want to use everything this week. So anything I was planning on saving for the next week and future weeks, I went ahead and popped into the freezer. Now, with all of that bread that we just finished making, I decided I wanted to make a little bit of orange marmalade. To start off with, I have 3 of those mandarin oranges. I washed them well and then started peeling off the peels. You want it so it's just the peel, not the white part of the pulp. And I sectioned off each of the pieces of orange into a section and kept those peels separate. You're going to slice those peels up as finely as possible after you finish peeling them off of the orange. And then I'm going to add a cup of water and the peels into the pan and let that boil for a few minutes. I kept the link for the recipe in the description box down below. You'll see they recommend to do this process 2 or 3 times just to help get rid of some of the bitterness that you might have in the orange peel otherwise, because you want that orange flavor but you don't want the bitterness. So you're basically boiling out some of that bitterness. And now on the last time after I finished straining out the water, I added in my water, added in more sugar, and I also added in vinegar. The recipe called for some lemon juice, but you can substitute vinegar for most recipes instead of lemon juice. So that's what I chose to do for this one. It also said you could add a dash of cinnamon, which I did choose to do at the very tail end. And that was a really good addition to the recipe. And I also added in those oranges. I just let those mix and just cook down. I did take out the orange slices partway through and slice them up, just mince them up so that they would be really fine and I wouldn't have large clumps of orange in the jam. I did want it to have some orange pulp in it, but I didn't want it to have a whole orange piece or anything like that, and so my solution was to fish them back out and cut them up. I could have minced them before putting them in, and that might have been a faster way to do things, but I've never made this before, and so this was my first time trying this out, and I got to say I will make it again because this was a lot of fun to make and it was really good. It was a delicious jam. So I finished out cooking it to my desired thickness. They said to take a dish that you've put in the freezer and then put a little bit into the dish and swirl it around, see if it starts to solidify rather quickly as it's cooled off, or if it's still very runny. If it's still very runny, you might want to cook it a little longer. but mine, I saw the little drips started solidifying pretty quickly after it hit that cold dish, so I decided that that was good enough, that was thick enough, and I dished it up, put it into a little container. You'll see it's very runny still here, but I want to show you what it looks like after it's cooled off here, and you'll see that it's thickened up quite a bit after it's cooled off. This is going to go perfect on that fresh bread we just made, as well as several other dishes throughout the week. Now to make something else I haven't ever made before, which is homemade mayonnaise. I just used vinegar, salt, and oil, and importantly 1 egg to make this homemade mayonnaise. Now my eggs are pasteurized. If you have unpasteurized eggs, you might want to have bought pasteurized or buy pasteurized for this, just because that will help make sure that you don't have some of the germs you could otherwise have in egg. But I fluffed up that egg, added in my vinegar, and then added in my salt as well. And I just used vinegar to replace the they have some lemon juice in the recipe that I've included in the link below, and I used the vinegar instead, and it turned out just as well. The trick to doing this and making sure that it actually turns out is to add that oil very slowly. And there were several times where I wasn't sure if it was going to thicken up, if it's going to turn out. So definitely add in the oil slowly. I found if you add in about a half a cup worth of oil, 1 spoon at a time, a few drops at a time, it turns into this milkshake consistency, a thicker consistency. And when you see that, that's when you can just kind of put a steady stream in. I wouldn't dump the whole container in, but you're gonna put a more steady stream and you don't have to use a spoon to spoon it in anymore. So you're gonna keep beating it until everything is well incorporated and until it's reached a really thick, nice mayonnaise consistency. And here you'll see it is thickened up really nicely. You can see it kind of form some peaks on the beaters there. And then if I hold it to the side, it's not going anywhere because it's very thick. And this was really delicious. I didn't know how easy it could be to make mayonnaise. Now, there were some trial and error, I would say, in fair warning that if you try to use a blender, that probably is not going to work. Food processor might work, but I don't have one. But definitely use the hand mixer. Now we're going to make a simple garden salad. And I like to make like a big bag of salad at the beginning of the week, and then I can just add it to different meals throughout the week. I use this chopper thing because I thought it was really cool, and I had gotten it, but I ended up returning it because it really doesn't do quite what I wanted it to do and isn't quite as good as I would like it to be. But it was cool to try out for the first time. I chopped up my green pepper, and then I also decided to chop up my onions. I decided to chop up the whole bag, all except for one little onion, just because I like to throw onions into the freezer and then they're ready. You can add a tablespoon or two to any old dish when you're wanting to add a little extra flavor, a little extra veggie to a dish. It's perfect. So I took a handful, it was probably about a half a cup worth of our pepper and onion, and I put that into a gallon Ziploc bag to store into the freezer. And then I also took about a half a cup of our onion and pepper mix and put that into another gallon Ziploc bag to start making our salad. I got one of our carrots, which I peeled and cut the ends off with, and then just sliced it up into matchstick slices. This will add a nice color to your salad, and it's also really delicious. Now that I have most of our veggies we're going to add to our salad, I started to cut up our actual lettuce for our salad. I cut the lettuce in half, keeping one of the halves attached still to the stalk. I like to keep the half that has the end or the stalk still attached to it and wrap that up in saran wrap or in the plastic that the lettuce came in and pop that back in the fridge. Having the little stalk on the end, I find makes it so the lettuce does last a little longer, just because I guess it's still getting nutrients from that or something. But I ended up washing my lettuce and cutting up pretty finely and then putting it in a bag. I also add a paper towel into my bag whenever I'm making a salad, just because it helps soak up any extra moisture that might be in there or that the lettuce might have still on it after washing it, and it keeps that lettuce fresh longer, so that way you don't have your salad going bad halfway through the week. I like having the salad within the fridge because I can just take out a little handful and add it to any old meal throughout the week, and it just adds that pop of color, adds a little bit of extra flavor, a little extra vegetable. It's a really easy vegetable to add to any meal. So, and then I also have that cheese, the mozzarella cheese on the side, that I can use to add a little bit of extra richness to my salads throughout the week. I then cut up all of those onions, as I said earlier, and stuck all those into a gallon Ziploc bag. This makes a lot of onions, but I love having onions in the freezer. I find it adds a lot of extra flavor to anything that I'm making. I also took 5 of my carrots, peeled them, cut the ends off, and then cut them into sticks and added them into a container with some water. This will make a great snack or side for lunches and will keep them fresh longer. Now we're going to make some homemade dressing. I'm making a French style dressing with some oil, ketchup, salt, garlic powder, vinegar, and a little bit of sugar. This one is a very simple recipe, and I make small batches of it just to make as much as I need at a time, but not make so much that I have lots of containers of random dressings throughout the fridge. Now this recipe is below as well, but I use 1/4 cup of oil, 2 tablespoons of ketchup, a tablespoon of vinegar, a little over a tablespoon of sugar, it's about a tablespoon and a teaspoon, 1/4 a teaspoon of garlic powder, and about 1/8 a teaspoon of salt. And then I just mix all this together for a little bit. It's going to look like it's not going to mix together because that oil really doesn't want to mix in. But if you just keep on working at it, keep on beating it together, you could also use a whisk instead of a spoon. You're going to get this really nice consistency. Here's me adding that extra teaspoon of sugar. I just like my dressings a little bit sweeter, but if you like yours a little more tart, then you can keep that off. And here we have our French dressing. Now we're going to make some roasted chicken legs. I decided to go ahead and process all of the chicken. I originally was thinking I might do various things with the chicken, but I wanted to keep it simple. So I created a simple rub with a teaspoon of garlic powder, a teaspoon of Italian seasoning, and a teaspoon of salt. Just mix that all together, and this is going to coat all of our chicken. I took the chicken out and then rolled them around in that mixture, made sure they were all well coated. I basically stuck them all in a bag, dumped the seasoning on top of them, and then shook it around after I closed the bag just to make sure that everything got well coated. This was a delicious coating. It's so simple, but it makes the flavor of the chicken come out really well, and it just makes everything taste really delicious, and that skin on the chicken crisped up really nicely too. I baked them at 350 for about 50 minutes and then took all the meat off the bones. I took all the bones and put it in about 4 cups of water and just let that boil. I wanted to make some nice chicken broth. Now I'm making a little bit of chicken salad. This is going to serve us for several meals. So with about a cup of our chicken, I put in 1/4 a cup of the mayonnaise, 1/2 a cup of our peppers and onions that we cut up earlier, 1/2 a teaspoon of salt, which you can adjust the salt if you'd like it less salty. I also decided to add in a teaspoon of vinegar just to help give a little bit of a zing because we didn't have mustard at this point. I stirred it all together and then tasted to see if I needed to add any seasonings or flavors. You could add a little bit of garlic powder too, just to give it a little bit more flavor, but I liked how this turned out, so I kept it the way it was. Now we're going to prepare our brown rice. Now for anybody who's out there and has made brown rice many times, you know that it takes longer than white rice to cook. While it is healthier and oftentimes cheaper, I decided I was going to go ahead and prepare it ahead of time, and that way I wouldn't have to worry about the longer cook time. I would already have it ready. I took my whole bag of brown rice, which was about 2.5 cups of brown rice, washed it, and then added 5 cups of our chicken broth into that. I ended up adding a little more water to it instead of just all broth, so 5 cups of liquid. Then I cooked it and steamed it until it was tender, and then I took half-cup portions and plated it out onto my freezer tray that had parchment paper on it and froze it. This is going to keep things from sticking together, and then you'll have some nice pre-portioned servings of the brown rice to take out and thaw for each individual meal as you make them. I also decided to cook up our pasta at a time. This might sound silly or a little different for anybody who wants to just spend the time to cook it as they are cooking their meals. That's perfectly all right, but I wanted to have things done ahead of time. So I took about 4 cups of our water, brought that to a slow simmer, then added a little bit of salt and almost all of our pasta. I added 3 cups of pasta into the water, let this cook until al dente, drained, and then I just kind of poured it out onto this baking sheet. This is going to help it to cool off quickly so that it won't overcook, and then I pop that in the freezer. Now here's our frozen pucks of our rice, our brown rice, and here's our pasta that we've frozen as well. So this just makes it so that I can add it really quickly and easily to any dish that I want, and we'll have our pasta or our rice already cooked. I don't have to think about it. Here's what I had day one. I had this pancake, egg, and sausage sandwich that I drizzled some of that vanilla syrup we had created earlier, and you can see this turned out really delicious. This is a very filling breakfast and perfect for on a day where you might be prepping a lot of different things. I ended up prepping over the course of 2 days, so that's a lot of work, but it will pay off as we are making our meals. It will be a lot quicker and easy to pay off meals. Here's day one's lunch. I took a cup of our pasta and added in 1/3 cup of our chicken salad mixture. I'm just making a simple pasta salad. I decided to add about an additional tablespoon of our mayonnaise that we had made, as well as a little dash of garlic powder and a dash of salt as well. Since we had added all that pasta in, I wanted to balance out the flavors. I served this with a handful of carrot sticks and 1 of the oranges. Next, I made dinner, which ended up being 2 of our potatoes that we had gotten in our haul. I washed them, stabbed them, and then microwaved them until they were tender. Then I cut them and mashed them out flat, added a little bit of margarine onto them, and then also took a 1/2 cup of broccoli, which I had taken from that bag of frozen broccoli, chopped it up really finely, and steamed it in the microwave until it was tender. Added 1/4 cup of our chicken. We had taken some of that chicken earlier and set it aside for later meals, and this is one of the later meals. Then I took a little dash of salt and added a little bit on top, along with a little bit of garlic powder and a tablespoon of our shredded mozzarella to make this kind of a cheesy broccoli chicken. I decided to add a 2nd tablespoon of cheese after looking and seeing how much cheese the 1st tablespoon had resulted in. I just wanted it to be like a nice cheesy take on a loaded baked potato. I popped it in the microwave and let that cheese just melt. That took about 30 seconds. Then added a little handful of our side salad along with a drizzle of our French dressing we had made, and here was dinner. This was fantastic, very filling, and I love that French dressing. Adds a really nice tang, a little variety and flavor as well. And then you've got a lot of nice vegetable on here as well as protein. So just a really good filling meal, and also very simple and quick to throw together. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Thanks for sticking around through this long one, and I will see you in the next one. We'll see how far this $80 takes us.